Reading practice from a book called You Can Trust the Communist to Be Communist. Chapter 2 continued. Oh, by the way, sorry. The name of the author is Dr. Fred C. Schwarz, from a book called You Can Trust the Communist to Be Communists. Chapter 2 continued. The dynamic nature of money. Money is not static. The amount of money spent 3 or 4 times will distribute 3 or 4 times as many goods. There is an intriguing story about a man who wrote a check for $100 without having any money in the bank. With it, he bought a certain article. The man from whom he purchased the article took the check and, without cashing it in the bank, used it to purchase certain goods. These he sold for $120, making a profit of $20 on the deal. The man to whom he gave the check did likewise. This happened 10 times, each person making a profit of $20. Before the check finally reached the bank, where it was dishonored. The 10 people who had handled it got together and decided that to avoid trouble, each of them would contribute $10 to cover the check. This was done. The $100 was paid, and each of them was richer by $10. This story simply illustrates that the question of credit and rate of circulation of money must be considered. You can say that again. Number 2, the role of psychology in the economy. Suppose everyone is persuaded that a depression is coming and decides not to buy another automobile for 12 months. The results would be an immediate depression in the automobile industry with all the consequences that follow. It is quite obvious that the psychological attitude of the people has a tremendous bearing on the economic situation of a country. This is an aspect of economic theory to which Marx gave little attention. 3. The relations of advertising to distribution. The question of psychology outlooks of the customer naturally leads to the question of advertising and its role in distribution. During the recession in 1958, this factor was understood more completely, and a campaign started urging people to buy. The recession did not develop in a depression. The Marxist cycle was broken. Marx himself cannot be blamed for his failure to consider the role of advertising, as the advertising industry was not in existence during his lifetime. It is the followers of Marx who are culpable in this respect. Consumer credit. An outstanding development of modern capitalism is consumer credit. Goods are purchased not with money presently owned, but by a promise to pay in the future. This has become such a large factor in the economy that any analysis which does not consider this is obviously fallacious. The continually expanding market. The continually expanding market. Human aspirations are limitless, and under a free economy, these form a continually expanding market. A large percentage of American industry now produces items that did not even exist a few years ago. The vast electronics industry, for example, has been a very recent development. The double car garage is now a normal. The double car garage is now as normal as the modern home as the faucet with running water. Soon the motorboat will be the routine companion of the car. Really? maybe not. People's capitalism. Possibly the most devastating repudiation of the Marxist doctrine is the development of people's capitalism within the United States. Marx foresaw the wealth the wealth of the community being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. The class owning this wealth he called the bourgeoisie, and the natural forces within capitalism would continually diminish the number of this class. Contrary to the expectations of Marx, the ownership of American industry is constantly enlarging. There are now nearly as many stockholders in the United States as there are members of organized labor. Excuse me. The profits received by the majority of these stockholders are utilized for purchasing. This renders the whole argument of the class war ridiculous. Nothing does such damage to the principles of Marxism as the development of worker ownership in American industry. Proletarian stockholders certainly make the concept of universal class war somewhat ludicrous. Number 7. The role of government and legislation. Finally, the Marxist analysis ignores the role of government and legislation in relation to the economy. The antitrust laws have restrained the development of monopoly within the American economy. Whatever the individual viewpoint of the role of government in economic affairs, it is a factor which cannot be ignored. In spite of foregoing, the Marxist analysis has convinced many people it would be a simple matter to go before any inexperienced student group and, taking them unprepared, convince them, practically every one of them, that the Marxist argument is sound. This is what the communists have done. Students throughout the world are being taught as a basic principle that capitalist system is evil and the creator of depression and war. Disenchantment with the capitalist system is the first step in the conversion of a student intellectual to communism. If the situation is considered objectively, it will be seen that there is much to be said in support of capitalism. The capitalist system has produced more goods, provided more equitable distribution, and maintained a higher level of personal freedom than any other system in the world has been able to do. The Korean student who spoke to me said, "Of course, in American there are far more freedom than anywhere else." "That is interesting," I replied. "How did the American people get that freedom?" He looked at me puzzled. "Let's think about it for a while," I said. "The freedom in America has a material and a spiritual foundation. The material foundation is the efficient production of goods in quantity, and their extensive distribution is so that most people have the material requirements of freedom: sufficient food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and other necessities. The material system within America has produced more food, clothing, and shelter per individual than any other system. Add to this material abundance the spiritual concept of man as the child of God, created, loved, redeemed, infinite in value, and possessed of certain inalienable rights. The result is this freedom you would admire." Then I asked, "What is the material system that has produced these goods in such quantity and distributed them so widely?" "I don't know," he replied. You most certainly do know. You have been telling me for half an hour how bad it is. It is the capitalist system. Did it ever occur to you that maybe the capitalist system that you abhor so much stands in casual relationship to the freedom you cherish so highly? He was lost. This was not part of the closed circle of arguments that he had heard. His arguments were all worked out and complete. These new ideas came in and shattered the symmetry and perfection. The idea of collective ownership fascinates some people, but its benefits are a mirage. The story is told of a visitor to a Russian factory who asked the workers, "Who owns this factory?" "We do," they replied. "Who owns the land on which it is built?" "We do." "Who owns the production of the factory when they are made?" "We do." Outside in every corner of a large park were three battered jalopies. The visitor asked, "Who owns the cars out there?" They replied, "We own them, but one of them is used by the factory manager, one is used by the political commissar, and the other is used by the secret police." Oh my God. Oh. The same investigator came to a factory in America and said to the workers, "Who owns this factory?" "Henry Ford," they replied. "Who owns the land on which it is built?" "Henry Ford." "Who owns the products of the factories when they are made?" "Henry Ford." Outside the factory was a vast park filled with every make and variety of modern American automobile. He said, "Who owns all those cars out there?" They replied, "Oh, we do." You may, you may take your choice, but personally, give me the automobile. The concept that capitalism is inherently evil and collective ownership inherently good is contradicted finally by one unanswerable fact. Wherever communism is in power, the people flee by the millions. They leave everything they love. They flee to loneliness and the unknown to escape the horror of life under communist rule. On the other hand, when all the evils of the capitalist system have been admitted, the fact remains that every year multiplied thousands risk their lives not trying to get out of America, but trying to get in. They swim to the Rio Grande. Their goal is not to live at America's highest standard, but to live at her lowest. On the comparative basis, the economic system of competitive free enterprise has produced abundance and liberty and is a magnet to the less fortunate. Many students, however, have a sense of shame concerning capitalism. They have been convinced by communist arguments that the capitalist system is evil, that it has failed, and that it must be replaced. Once convinced of this, a student has taken the first step towards becoming a communist.